Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field, and unfortunately, Wes, we have to talk about a difficult defeat. Sunday in Atlanta, the Packers fall to the Falcons 25-24, getting outscored 13-0 in the fourth quarter. Packers let this one get away. There's no two ways about it. They played pretty darn good football for three quarters, but it all kind of unraveled on both sides of the ball in the fourth quarter, and they came back from Atlanta with a lot of regrets.
Yeah, and I think the tough thing about this, and I know I notice it with our fans, the Insider Inbox column, these losses are always difficult because, you don't get blown out. There isn't one thing that you can point to. It's just 15 minutes of regrettable football at the end of that game. And
Yep.
Matt LaFleur, it's not a big thing. I know it's not going to draw the most headlines, but he hit it on the head afterwards, and he reiterated on Monday. Complimentary football in this league is so important. And when you look at the Atlanta Falcons and what they did in the fourth quarter and the people that stepped up, yeah, Bijan Robinson's pretty darn good. Yeah, Desmond Ridder made some good plays, some good checks, but it was across the board with players stepping up. For the Green Bay Packers, they just didn't have that one guy that kind of put it on their shoulders. So not that you need it to be one guy, but sometimes that's where you look at the game against Chicago and you're like, well, Aaron Jones, that offensive line, that gave them the spark. Green Bay needed a spark in the fourth quarter, and they just couldn't find one.
Yeah, that was the thing. As that fourth quarter was unfolding, the Packers began it with a 24-12 lead. Early in the fourth quarter, the Falcons hit a 45-yard deep shot down the field that put them into scoring range. And so even though the Packers were up by 12 points, once they hit that big shot, they were down in the red zone. It was like, okay, this is game on for an entire fourth quarter. And the Packers just never, whether it was on offense or defense, were never able to make a play that even started to shift the momentum. If the defense got a third down stop, they gave up a fourth down conversion, or the Falcons were kicking a field goal. The offense was unable to get a first down. The last three possessions, a 3-and-out, a 3-and-out, and a 4-and-out. Both sides of the ball had opportunities to turn the tide, to get things going back in the right direction. And it's really too bad because if the Packers had been able to either hang on or find a way with that final possession with 57 seconds left to get the points that would have been needed to win this game, it would have been such an uplifting victory because you went into this game without Christian Watson, without Aaron Jones. You find out 90 minutes before kickoff David Bakhtiari can't play. Those are three of your most important, most valuable players on the entire offense, yet everything was going just fine until the end of the game. And give the Falcons credit, when the chips were down, as you said in Insider Inbox, when the chips were down and the plays had to be made, the Falcons were the ones that made them, the Packers didn't.
Yep, and unfortunately not every quarter is created equal. In the fourth quarter, if you win that one as decisively as the Falcons did, 166 total yards to 11, obviously the point swing that you just touched on, it's going to be something that catapults you to a victory. To quickly pull a great line from the wonderful Dom Capers, I will start with the positives for a second. And the positive that my takeaway is that this game showed you again how much of a gamer Jordan Love is. A lot of things working against this offense. You don't have Christian Watson in week 2. Well, now you know you're not going to have Aaron Jones. You don't have your all-pro left tackle. You lose Elton Jenkins. All the depth that I spent training camp talking about you got the veterans where you need them. Well, it got young real quick. And Jordan Love still rallied the guys. He still made the most of it. And I love the play call. I probably have beaten it to death more than anybody else on the beat, but being aggressive early on with the flea flicker, giving them something to sort of set the tone, to give you that feather in your cap. Matt LaFleur and the offense, I like the way they started this thing off with the first 15 scripted plays. It was just a matter of execution. And the Green Bay Packers, for better or worse, it kind of turned into this game where you either were on a scoring drive, you kind of were going 3-and-out, and unfortunately the 3-and-outs came at the wrong time in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I want to get to the young players for the Packers that stepped up on offense and gave them a chance to win this game. But I think the other thing, and we don't need to go through chapter and verse on everything that went wrong in the fourth quarter. There was, the 4th and 4 with the read option play, the zone read play by the Falcons. You regret that one. There's the 3rd and 1 on offense with A.J. Dillon. You regret that one. But Matt LaFleur also made a point on Monday to say, hey, it's not as though the first 3 quarters of this game film were, pristine, totally clean football. The Packers had a ton of missed opportunities, whether you're talking about, taking a delay of game on a field goal, which then pushes, the Packers 5 yards further back, and LaFleur decides not to try from 56 yards and play the field position game there off of the first possession. So the flea flicker, which drew the defensive pass interference, ends up going to waste there. Rasul Douglas gets an interception early in the ball game, but then on a 3rd down, you have a miscommunication on pass protection. Jordan Love gets sacked by a free runner, a free blitzer, so that turnover is not turned into points. Again, the complementary football thing. Defensively, the Packers dropped 2 interceptions that hit them right in the hands, right in the chest, however you wanna say it. So there were all of these missed opportunities where, yes, the Packers had a 24-12 lead after 3 quarters, but when you're looking at it strictly from the Green Bay perspective, and certainly there were things Atlanta did wrong, and they had their regrets in the first 3 quarters as well, but the Packers really felt like they should have been ahead by a lot more than 12 points after 3 quarters. But then what it comes down to is in the 4th quarter, and this is what the NFL is all about, is when it's crunch time, when it's game on the line, if you want to call it winning time or whatever phrase you want to use, what you do in those moments either magnifies your regrets from earlier in the game or it erases them. It takes them away. The Packers' regrets became magnified, and the Falcons got to forget about all theirs because they walked out with a win.
Yeah, and Mike, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back because that's not what I'm saying here, but what did you and I talk about the most last week? There were 2 big tangibles I thought were in this matchup. It was, as you wrote in, one last look, who wins the ground game?
Right.
Where is that game decided?
Right.
And then the turnover margin. Green Bay actually managed to win the turnovers in this with that pick from Rasul Douglas, but how different is this football game if that is 3-0, or as Rasul even said in the locker room afterwards, 5-0 plus 5? Because Rudy Ford had his hand on a ball. I mean, there were opportunities.
Yeah, there were some deflected balls that deflected up in the air, and the Packers couldn't come down with them.
The Jair one would have been a spectacular play if he made it. It would have been probably a highlight reel type play. The real gut punch for me, though, was the Quay one, just because it was almost a carbon copy of what happened in Chicago. He had the right zone drop. He had the read. It was something the Packers were looking for, and you just couldn't quite bring it in.
A young quarterback who just didn't see him and threw the ball right to him. And that was – it was. You're right. It was a carbon copy of Chicago. He caught the one in Chicago. He didn't catch this one. That happens.
And last thing I'll just say on this quickly, Bijan Robinson came as advertised, a really explosive young man, 2-way player. As I joked in Insider Inbox, not even really a joke, it's the truth. You're kind of happy that he didn't end up in the NFC North. I mean, this guy looks like he's going to be a real problem down in the South. But the other aspect of it, tip your cap to Desmond Ridder, because I didn't give him a whole lot of respect going in this thing. I wasn't overlooking him, but you see the stats, you see how they play conservatively, and you're like, okay, how good is this guy? What they're trying to do, what Arthur Smith's trying to do down there in Atlanta, the young man runs it really well. He had some good checks, that slant play that Matt LaFleur talked about on the 3rd down to Bijan Robinson. People can talk whatever they want about the containment on the keeper on the 4th and goal. Mike, when I finally noticed he had the ball, he was crossing the end zone. I mean, It was a really good look. You have to defend it better.
Yeah.
But Atlanta did an exceptional job of executing their offense, and that was the difference late.
Yeah, I don't want to take credit away from Atlanta. I certainly don't. But I'm not going to be on the Desmond Ridder bandwagon after what I thought should have been a 3-interception game for a young quarterback. I don't think he really played all that well, quite frankly. But the difference in the game was Bijan Robinson, because, yes, the Packers struggled to stop the run all game long. It was a problem. But what made it a bigger problem is that when they were in position on a lot of plays to stop the run and the players were where they were supposed to be, Bijan Robinson just made guys miss. Yep. And so that's not about scheme, that's not about the call, that's not about whatever. That's about getting a really, really dynamic offensive weapon on the ground. And there was one play, Matt LaFleur even talked about it, and I know exactly the one he's talking about, where Robinson made 4 guys miss in a span of about a second and a half.
Yep.
And that, we had talked about that all last week about okay, where is your tackling going to be in this game, and are you going to be able? Is a missed tackle going to lead to an explosive run, or is a missed tackle just going to lead to a couple of extra yards? And Robinson was the difference in this game, hands down. When they had those 4th and 1s, they knew that we're just going to give the ball to number 7, and he's going to find a way to move the chains. And even on some 4th and 1s, he's getting 5-7 yard runs that are pushing the ball downfield. Just too much for the Packers to overcome.
They made a good adjustment too. I mean, they stopped trying to run at Kenny Clark after the first quarter, and they started getting more of the wide zone going. And when you have a guy that can accelerate that quickly, and being able to win on the edges
and cut that quickly and move in the shiftiness of it, and the Packers just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, that was a real challenge. And again, Mike, this isn't new. We talked about this even before the opener. The Packers have some real tests coming up. Now they're going to avoid Alvin Kamara because of the suspension, and but you still got Gibbs after that. You still got Josh Jacobs coming down the pipe. They have some tough run offenses that they're going to face, and you have to learn those lessons.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the tough thing, because you know how this league works, Wes. I mean, yes, opponents, you spend some time looking at the previous year's game film and whatnot when you're preparing early in the season. Once you get a couple games on film, then everybody's looking at those in terms of how they game plan. This performance, run defense-wise, is now on film for every single Packers opponent to look at and to pick apart and to devise their game plan. The Packers are going to be forced to stop the run, to improve in that area, and you're not just going to be able to take the field and say, all right, we're going to score a bunch of points and take the other team out of their running game. It was 24-12 going into the 4th quarter, and the Falcons were like, no, we're not giving up on the run. We're going to keep running the football, and because they knew there would be enough possessions left in the game to win, and that's what they were able to do.
Did it with really good tempo too. I was impressed by that. They got in and out of their calls pretty quick, and that's not always easy to do in run calls.
And that's where I do give Ritter credit. And when you had mentioned the way he ran some checked out of certain things, you saw the way they were running motions, getting a read on what the Packers were doing defensively. They had the time on the play clock to do that, and they made the Packers pay. I do want to get to some of those bright spots, certainly talking about young players. First, a little bit of sponsor business. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better. All right, when you're talking about the bright spots and what the Packers were able to do here, it starts with the rookie wide receivers. Jaden Reed with 2 touchdowns, Dontavian Wicks with another one. Wicks was the target on the opening play flea flicker that drew the pass interference penalty. Christian Watson was not in this game. Romeo Doubs got a lot of attention from the Falcons in their secondary, and those the 2 rookies, the 2nd rounder in Reed, the 5th rounder in Wicks, those guys stepped up and gave Jordan Love good targets, and they made some very efficient and important plays in this football game.
Yeah, Mike, you got a chance to see Greg Jennings and James Jones right off the bat. I did not, in terms of actually covering them, but I remember that 2011 season, and although I wasn't full-time on the beat yet, I remember watching Randall Cobb and the limited opportunities he got that season, just how much poise he showed, and just for a guy that entered the league at 20 years old, the first 1990 birth year in the National Football League. But he looks so much more mature than that. Jaden Reed gives me those same vibes. I mean, he's just a guy that gets it. That's not to say that he won't make mistakes. They're going to come.
Yeah.
But the receiver position, and especially with him on punt returns, that is a position where you can't be a deer in the headlights. You have to be ready for it. You have to be prepared, and you have to be able to stand up at those times. I really like what I've seen from Reed. And again, it's going to be a work in progress. The Packers have to find themselves here. They got to rally back from this loss. But you just sit there and think, man, oh man, if they can get Christian Watson back, we'll see when it happens. But the reps that Reed has taken, even Wicks getting a big confidence boost with his 32-yard touchdown, and Romeo Doubs just being so consistent despite coming off of that hamstring injury, the Packers have a wide array of receiving options here. And I think a guy like Reed is only going to keep getting better.
Yeah, but even as good a game as Jaden Reed had, they're dealing with the offense with Love and Reed and the ups and downs that go along with it. There was a play early in the game where Reed didn't have his head turned and the ball kind of whizzes past him, right? And then on the first play of the final drive, Love and Reed just not quite on the same page, where he's running a quick stop route, and Love thought maybe he was going to turn a different way or something, and the ball's a little bit off target. So you're dealing with those ups and downs. But I am totally on board with you. You have to love what you see. There is a smoothness to his game. There is this presence that he has out there that just says, I belong in the NFL, and I fit here. And we were talking about it all through training camp and the preseason, how he just looks like he fits this offense and the things that Matt LaFleur wants to do with a receiver with that kind of skill set. So,
and the other thing, unfortunately, you cover the press conferences. I go into the post game, locker room. I was in the Jaden Reed scrum when they won and when they lost. And he's the same dude.
Yeah.
He was there for it. He had his foot up against the locker saying, hey, it is what it is. You have to learn from it. That goes a long way.
Yeah.
They got a lot of those guys in that locker room too.
One of the things I'll point out too, because we mentioned the flea flicker, this is the second game in a row we've seen some real creativity from Matt LaFleur and his offensive coaching staff, because they came out in the second half against Chicago looking for a spark offensively, and they called the throwback screen, real deceptive play and everything. They took the field at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, all the noise in that dome and everything, and the first play of the game they run the flea flicker, not afraid to try some of this stuff to provide a spark. And really, other than, yes, there were certainly breakdowns in the running game. There was the one miscommunication in pass protection that led to a sack. One of the plays on the final drive, Jordan Love was under pressure and unfortunately couldn't get a deep ball to Reed, where Reed had actually run a really good route and had beaten his man, but Love just wasn't able to step into the throw. So again, another regret there. But the Packers, Rasheed Walker stepped in at left tackle for David Bakhtiari. You had Royce Newman ended up stepping in for Elton Jenkins. Sounds like Jenkins is going to be out a couple of weeks at a minimum with a knee injury. And Yosh Nijman coming in and playing some snaps at tackle when Rasheed Walker is playing as the sixth O lineman, kind of that extra tight end thing, whatever you want to call it. Packers had a lot of moving parts on the offensive line in this game, and unfortunately things just didn't come together in the fourth quarter. But 24 points through the first three quarters on the road, that's not a bad performance. You just wish they could have added, all they needed was one drive, and you don't even know if they necessarily needed points. Yeah. They needed one drive, something to get going, to move the chains, to flip the field, to kill some clock, take your pick. And unfortunately, just the fourth quarter didn't live up to how they had performed in the first three.
No, and I think it ultimately, it's hard to get into a rhythm when when you have one team that controls the ball for 36 minutes, it runs 78, 76 plays, whatever it was, and the other one's at 47.
Yeah.
And unlike out of the break in Chicago where you had Aaron Jones, you had a veteran to turn to. Green Bay didn't really have that in this game. I thought that showed down the stretch, but tell you what, man, those are the type of crucibles though that guys learn from, especially when you have to kind of look at each other and be like, okay, how are we going to figure this thing out? And it's going to be an 18-week ride, and you hope that obviously it gets you to its peak by the end of it.
Yeah, well, the New Orleans Saints are up next for the home opener. 4 days after that, the Detroit Lions will be coming in. So it's worth talking about where things stand in the NFC North.
The same as last week.
Packers and Lions at 1-1. The Vikings and Bears are at 0-2. So nobody in the NFC North emerged from the first 2 weeks of the season unscathed. The Lions are certainly, regretting what went down for them on Sunday, because they had gotten the big win on the road over the Chiefs. They've got their home opener, all their fans behind them. The Seattle Seahawks, who had lost a tough home game in week one, they come in and kind of a shootout, much like the Lions and the Seahawks have had those kinds of games in the past. It was interesting catching the highlights later, how that game unfolded. Jared Goff threw a pick six in the fourth quarter. It looked like the Lions were dead and gone. They come back, they score 10 points down the stretch in the fourth quarter to force overtime, but then their defense can't get off the field in overtime. They give up the opening touchdown drive, and the Lions aren't able to get the ball back on offense in the OT. So Seattle leaves Detroit 1-1. Detroit comes out of that at 1-1, and we'll see here after week 3 when the Lions and the Packers will both be on a short week, who's going to be 2-1, who is somebody going to be 1-2. Long way to go here, but it's already looking like that Week 4 game at Lambeau Field is going to be awfully big, no matter what happens in Week 3.
It will be, and again, we're really early in the week, but it sounds like David Montgomery here, possibly a thigh injury, potentially taking him down. That was another thing you and I talked about in preseason, that he's a talented guy, but he's had a lot of injuries, and that was one of the issues that kind of prevented him from being an every down player consistently for the Bears. That's going to be big because it looks like Gibbs, as talented as this young man is, the pass pro is probably the area of game where he's still trying to catch up. There is no Jamal Williams to go back to. Very interested to see how they handle that. This doesn't have anything to do with the North, but I mean, a real nice, strong gut check by Seattle. A disappointing loss. They rally back for a win on the road. I thought Geno Smith showed a lot of poise, and certainly when you have someone like Tyler Lockett, who was kind of quiet in Week 1, being able to bounce back the way he did. A lot of talented teams in the NFC. I mean, I think there's a few that have sort of really separated themselves early on, but especially in this division, in the NFC North, it is going to be anyone's race. And even a team like Chicago that is really struggling right now, you're still only one game behind here.
Yeah, and you know that the Vikings are as happy as anyone that both the Packers and the Lions lost in Week 2, because the Vikings had that tough task going to play Thursday Night Football at Philadelphia. They gave the Eagles a run for their money. Ended up losing that game by 1 score. The Vikings are 0-2, but now they get a little bit of extra rest heading into Week 3, and they're looking at it as, hey, yeah, we're 0-2, but we're only 1 game out of the NFC North lead, and it sure feels like it's going to take a while to see if anybody in this division is actually going to be able to take control of things.
And it's funny, it seems like every year we do this show and we start talking about games in Week 2 and Week 3 and Week 4 in the narrow margin of victory.
Yep.
You have the Minnesota Vikings at 0-2, now going to be going up against an LA Chargers team that is 0-2 and has lost those 2 games by a combined 3 points.
Right.
Now, Austin Eikler, we'll talk about this later in the week, whether or not he's back, whether or not he's not. That changes the entire complexion of this game. As I was talking to you about yesterday, Dalton Reisner now signing with the Vikings after their banged-up offensive line, trying to get some more depth. Moves and counter moves.
Yeah.
And seeing exactly how those things are going to equate to a win. It will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and everybody's talking about that seat getting hot under Brandon Staley with the Chargers after the playoff debacle last year, and now they're starting 0-2 in 2023. They've got the Vikings on Sunday. The Packers are going to have their hands full with the Saints team that is coming into Lambeau Field at 2-0 off of a road Monday night victory over the Panthers. We will talk about that and that entire Saints team some more on our next show. But for now, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.